Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. Welcome to those joining us in person here at Dallas College's Cedar Valley campus and those joining us online for a conversation on how we prepare our power grid for the future economy. Our program today will run approximately 1 hour. That's with 45 minutes for our panel conversation, moderated by my colleague, Kayla Guo, and 15 minutes for your questions. So we can get to as many questions as possible. We'll be doing all Q&A through our Q&A portal. That's at texastribune.org/ask. I should note, for those who are here in person, there's a QR code on the back of your program that will take you right to that page where you can submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. We are grateful always for the support of our sponsors. Our major sponsor is for today's program is CPS Energy. And please note that while sponsorship provides critical support for the Tribune, sponsors play no role in programming or the line of questioning for Tribune events. We are deeply grateful to our host, Dallas College, Cedar Valley campus. I want to turn the program over to President of Cedar Valley campus, Dr. Joe Seabrooks, who will offer a quick welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, it's okay if you all applaud, because I'm going to tell you, I am extraordinarily grateful and honored and humbled that of all the places that you could host this meeting, this event, you've chosen Dallas College, the Cedar Valley campus. You know, I can't tell you how excited I am to be able to engage all of the brilliant minds in this most critical conversation today. But I also just want to share with you just how valuable our work has become to the entire Texas economy. You know, I'm running around today, and I would love to spend more time with you, but I just left our Automotive and Diesel Advisory Board, where those folks are making sure that our instruction is on point for the graduates that they will soon hire. And then I got to race across campus. You may have noticed these tents, and there's 16 high school teams building tiny homes, and it's all part of their academic program, and we're preparing them for the workforce of the future. But I like to believe that my purpose in life is not to just focus on the workforce. My purpose in life is to help people find the tools, the fortitude, and the belief to discover their pathway to prosperity. Because for me, prosperity, we all shouldn't work for 40 years and just have to figure it out at the end. And so thank you for all that you do, and we're grateful for you choosing us, and we hope that this won't be your last time visiting us. And as I leave the podium, I'd like to introduce you to our magnanimous Chief of Staff in the Chancellor's office to bring you greetings from the Chancellor's office, Mr. Juan Garcia.
See, Joe, I got an applause, so thank you for that. Well, welcome everybody on behalf of the Chancellor. He unfortunately is in D.C., so he could not be here to welcome everybody here. But, you know, I graduated from here, actually here where we're at in this spot. They used to have outside graduations at 90-degree heat, so I don't miss that. And I came to this campus, so it's great to be here in the position that I'm in. And thank you for everything that you do for our students. And so it wouldn't be possible without the partnerships like these. So everything that you've done, everything that you continue to do, and everything that you will continue to do as well is the reason why we will be graduating close to 10,000 students next week. So thank you all for the support as always. Thank you for choosing Dallas College, and we're here to help anytime that you guys need anything from us. So thank you and welcome.
So the Texas Tribune Spring Member Drive starts today. Our newsroom is looking for 500 Texans to take action and support independent journalism for the first time. Will you be one of them? Please consider making a donation of any amount at texastribune.org/donate. I also want to mention earlier this week we announced our first batch of speakers for the 2025 Texas Tribune Festival. Joining us in downtown Austin, November 13th through 15th, are just among many Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Maureen Dowd, U.S. Representative Tony Gonzalez, Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker, U.S. Senator Adam Schiff, and U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett. hear their thoughts on state and national politics, the first year of the second Trump administration, the upcoming midterm elections, and the ideas driving the future of our state and nation. And we know that energy will certainly be part of those conversations at TribFest. We'll have plenty to talk about. We hope that you can join us. You can purchase your tickets now at tribfest.org. So let's get to today's program. Let's see here. ERCOT, the state's main electric grid operator, predicts Texas will need to provide nearly double the amount of power within 6 years, based in part on the growing interest of large power users in coming to Texas. So today, with this esteemed panel, we discuss how we can prepare the grid and the state's power infrastructure for this dramatic increase in demand, what the costs are, and who's going to pay. So let's get to know our panelists. Sandra Haverly has been working on consumer pocketbook issues with the Texas Consumer Association, it's TCA, since 1968, and has served as president of TCA for the last decade. Dr. Michael Weber is the Sid Richardson Chair in the LBJ School of Public Affairs and the John J. McKetta Centennial Energy Chair in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, at the University of Texas at Austin. Garrett Golding is an Assistant Vice President for Energy Programs at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. In this role, he leads cross-functional collaboration within the Dallas Fed and engagement with energy industry leaders to develop new insights on the intersection of energy and the economy. And our moderator, Kayla Guo, is a politics reporter for the Texas Tribune, covering state politics and government. Before joining the Tribune, she covered Congress for the New York Times as a reporting fellow based in DC. And Kayla has also covered transportation policy for Politico and a number of other roles. We are grateful to have our panelists join us for this very important conversation, for those joining us here in person and online. And with that, I turn the program over to Kayla.
Thanks so much, Matt. All right, so let's just set the scene. Texas is growing, our population is growing, our economy is changing. There's more extreme heat and colds throughout the seasons. All of this is turbocharging our energy needs. Like Matt said, ERCOT forecasts that demand is going to nearly double by 2030, with demands being largely driven by large users like crypto miners, data centers, of which there are many in the Dallas area, and electrifying oil and gas. So that poses a big challenge, but we've also seen how the market is responding. Renewables and batteries played a huge role in keeping the grid humming this past summer and winter. Texas has increased its generation capacity by 30% over the past 4 years. A big chunk of that was solar, wind, and battery. And regulators and lawmakers have been thinking about this for a long time. So I think first I would like to get a temperature check from you all on the grid. How's the grid doing in terms of responding to this demand? I think Winter Storm Uri has sort of shaped how Texans think about the grid, but it's been a few years since that. I wonder if you could get us up to speed. How's it changed? How's reliability improved since then? Maybe we start with you, Dr. Weber, and we can go down.
Sure, and great opportunity to have this conversation, so thank you for being here. I think the grid is an important topic, something I think about a lot as a professor doing research and teaching, and also some of the different advising I offer to different companies. And I would say that the Texas grid is simultaneously in good and bad condition. So I'll talk about the good condition. You already hinted at it. There's been a lot of things that have been built in the last few years, a lot of wind, solar, batteries, some natural gas. A lot of capability has been implemented into the grid, a lot of capacity, and that will be very good for us, and that's great news. And there's also a potential for a lot of flexibility. There are a lot of things that we operate in the grid where we just turn it on and off based on when we want to, as opposed to when the grid is most able to take it. And so we have some tools available that we've not deployed around flexibility, like thinking about what time of day we charge our electric vehicles, or do we need to do water treatment 24 hours a day? Maybe we can do it 16 hours a day and use off-peak electricity, or there are a variety of things we can do. So in some ways, the grid is doing fine. However, there's some ways the grid's not doing fine. There's population growth, economic growth. We have hotter heat waves that last longer. We have colder cold snaps that are becoming more frequent. We have electrification of oil and gas in the Permian and elsewhere. We have perhaps electrification of other industries, battery manufacturing, maybe hydrogen or carbon capture. We have electric vehicles, data centers, artificial intelligence, you name it. There's a lot of things that are pushing growth into a new trajectory. And if you look at the grand history of the power sector in the United States, it grew for about 120 years, say 1880 to around 2000, and then didn't grow for 20 years. And now it's growing again, and we've forgotten how to grow. So all the people who are in planning positions or are often in regulatory positions or investment decision-making authority haven't been in those positions from an era when we had growth. So we need to develop the muscle memory on how to grow again at every stage, from building the things to financing them to regulating them to passing the policies that enable them. So we're in growth mode again, which is pretty exciting, but the growth is pretty rapid. And we haven't had growth this fast in the power sector since the 80s. However, in the 80s, when we had growth this fast, we had grown faster in the 70s. So the 80s was a slowdown from the 70s. The last time we had growth this much higher in this decade than the prior decade was about 100 years ago. So this is a phenomenal thing. It's pretty exciting because that means we're gonna need a lot of everything, wind, solar, gas, et cetera. Nuclear is coming on, more batteries, more efficiency. So we're ready. We built some things. We have flexibility if we choose to use it. We're not ready in that demand's gonna double, as you said. That's in gigawatts. The power demand might double. The gigawatt hours, the amount of electricity you consume over the course of the day, might triple. And that's in the coming decade or so. So we have to prepare for a doubling or tripling of power or energy, depending on what axis you like to look at as an engineer. And we got to figure out how to do it. Now, if anyone could do it, it'll be Texas. Like, we're faster than every other state. We're faster than most regions in the world. Maybe only China is faster. So we can move quickly into scale. That's one of the unique capabilities of Texas, if we don't get in our own way. There's also a lot of legislation under consideration that's designed kind of to slow us down and get in our own way. So if the legislation becomes law that makes it illegal to build things or makes it onerous to build things, we might not be ready. So we still have a lot of uncertainty with the legislature over the next week or so. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm both optimistic and scared all at the same time.
Yeah, just Dr. Weber put that perfectly. A couple of things that I would add on this, and we touched on Uri, a lot of major improvements since then. It's very difficult to see that kind of cascading effect, where we didn't have the type of weatherization standards, not just the standards, but the enforcement of them that we have today. Lots better resilience up and down the energy value chain than we had back then. And to meet this rising demand, rising load profile that we're looking at, one thing that's been a significant change from now versus Uri is the entrance of battery storage here. That was a significant difference maker last summer to help during those peak hours, particularly during the heat wave in August. It's a very elegant solution as solar starts to wind down. In the late afternoon, batteries can ramp up and fill that gap very well. What I worry about going forward is whether or not that's enough, because we're not just talking about these rising peaks. As Dr. Weber alluded to, just that rising base is going up from everything everywhere all at once, like the movie, on electricity demand is what we're talking about with not just the data centers, but also with oil and gas, also with electrification of residential area, not just the growth that we have, but electrification of heating, electrification of cooking appliances. This is a little bit different profile than we've looked at. The state has grown for 20 years in economic growth and population, but that power generation has only crept up around 1% every year, and we're not looking at that type of reality going forward. So to meet that demand going forward, yes, we need all that solar, yes, we need all that wind, and yes, we need all the battery storage. It's where we're lagging on what's expected in some of the baseload generation that I don't know if there's a great solution or great answer for right now.
I just want to add to that because it came up in both comments, or all the comments actually. Our organization is really focused on the cost and what is going to cost everybody, and that's something that's getting lost in all of this. And Michael's right, we went through this period of non-growth, and now we're going to see exponential growth, which means exponential costs. And because things were left alone for a while, for lack of a better way to say it, or not developed maybe in the way they should have, things are more expensive now. Things are more expensive after COVID. Things are more expensive after Uri, obviously, too, in the growth of the grid. So while we're talking about all this growth and all the changes and proposals, we also have to be concerned about the cost of it and what it's going to cost not only the residents of the state, but the businesses that are getting ready to locate here.
Could you talk more and break down for people who are watching of where those costs come from and how they are distributed at this point and what this growth could look like in terms of power bills and for everyday Texans, just wondering if their power bill is going to skyrocket or not?
Well, for everyday Texans, for the residents, you will pay on your bill the cost of your local grid. And your percentage of your bill in some areas of the state may be 50% or more, depending on if you're in a competitive area that gets billed to you for those lines and those poles and the vegetation management that is done by the Encore, AEP, CenterPoint companies of the world. Some of the Texans live in a co-op area and some live in cities that manage their own. But each one of them bills you for that. And for many years, that grid wasn't upgraded, or those particular lines and poles weren't upgraded. But now we're looking at that. Now that storms are worse and people are upset about outages post a big event like Burl, for example, people want the equipment upgraded, but the equipment is now more expensive, and you have to go back and replace old equipment with new. And in many areas, you're paying for still paying for the old equipment too. So for everyone, not just residential, there is a cost built in that's basic to your electric bill that's separate from what the price is that's being generated on the market in terms of sales of the electricity. And that is where we're going to probably see some of the biggest increases in terms of pricing for folks.
Garrett, could you talk more about the challenges related to baseload generation that you mentioned? And I think in Texas, the idea is, natural gas serves kind of the base that we have because it's not intermittent. But can you talk about some of the challenges involved there in building that up, and whether it's global or national factors that are impacting that? How does that forecast look?
So there's kind of two parts of this story that have played out over the last couple of years. The first has been kind of a longer term trend of, as you're building out more solar, particularly within ERCOT, that comes to dominate the power stack in the middle of the day in ERCOT, which means fewer hours that those natural gas plants are going to be called up to dispatch. At the same time, wholesale prices for electricity have been generally, declining over that period as well. So X plus Y means that this is fewer price signals for more of that natural gas to be incentivized to come online. That's been the longer term trend over the last couple of years. What's also happened over the last year especially is inflation among the equipment and to get those power plants built. It went from one of the cheapest sources of supply on a kilowatt basis to a very essentially doubling over just the last couple of years. So that further squeezes the potential for a natural gas plant developer to say, I want to spend X hundred million or $1 billion on a new plant within the ERCOT market. So it's a pretty significant challenge on not knowing exactly where that additional baseload is going to come from, on top of the fact that we have, if you got in line today for a gas turbine, it's 5 years away, because of supply chain lags that are out there globally. So that's just like over the next 5 years or so. I think longer term, there's a role for nuclear to play in this as well. On both the conventional side, there's a lot of talk on advanced nuclear, small modular reactors, and those have a role to play in helping settle this on a longer term basis. And I think we're going to see that in Texas before we see it anywhere else in the country. But there is this gap over the next 5 years that I don't know where it's going to come from right now.
And last session, the legislature passed the Texas Energy Fund, which I think was aiming to address this very challenge, try to incentivize people to come and build natural gas plants. Where do we stand on that?
I think it's not doing that well right now, I would say. So there are a couple things happening. The Texas Energy Fund is essentially like a revolving loan program where you can borrow money at a low interest rate to build your gas plant, and then as you make money, you pay back the loan. And Texas does that very well. We do revolving loan funds for water and a variety of things. This is a pretty typical Texas approach to getting things built, and it's pretty popular for a variety of reasons. Lowers the cost of capital. It helps send a signal that it's desired. And it hasn't really led to much new natural gas construction. And there are a variety of reasons, and Garrett kind of hinted at some of them. One is the prices for electricity in the wholesale markets have dropped. Wind and solar are very cheap, and gas historically has been very cheap the last few years in Texas. And because all those things are cheap, we're not seeing high prices, and so if you don't see high prices, you can't make your money back on the power plant you built. And so the market's just not conducive for expensive investment right now, especially if there's a fuel dependency on that investment, meaning you have to pay for your power plant and then pay for the fuel. And the Texas Energy Fund helps with the power plant, but doesn't help with the fuel. So only part of the equation is help. That's part of the problem, is there's not a lot of money to be made because ERCOT's performing well. From the consumer side, like ERCOT's performing well, prices are low, therefore it's hard to build more power plants. Other things that have happened, this backlog in gas turbines, 5 years, I'm hearing now 6 years for gas turbines, means you can't comply with the timeline of some of the fund's requirements because it's not just money, go build something, you get to build something within a reasonable timeline. That's part of it. The other thing is gas prices. Natural gas prices have almost doubled or so in the last few months. And so if gas prices are higher and there's a backlog in turbines and ERCOT's not making a lot of money, it's not that desirable to build a big gas power plant. So we've seen several companies that had first tried to get this money pull out. There are still several left. And so it's not like it'll go to zero. And I think a variety of things will happen that'll make it desirable again because of the rising demand we talked about just a few minutes ago. So I don't think it'll be zero, but maybe some of the timelines will have to be relaxed or there'll have to be some criteria relaxed. I would love to see something like that for nuclear. I'd love to see something like that for some other projects that are important to Texas. So we'll see where it goes, but it hasn't gotten much traction yet. Now, another thing that happens with natural gas power plants is there are a lot of imported parts. So if you have a lot of imported parts and you're exposed to this global trade war and tariffs, it's hard to know what the cost of your plant will be. So probably a lot of people are gonna go back and get out the pencil and paper and try to refigure out what their costs are. And that will introduce significant delays again. So we'll see where it goes. I think it's not a bad idea to have revolving loan funds, and we're good at it in Texas, but it hasn't gotten the result we wanted yet, I would say.
Despite all that, I heard testimony in the legislature last night that said the market, PC, ERCOT were equipped to respond to the explosive demand that is being projected over the next few years. The legislature is not very well going to let things alone. So I want to talk about SB 6. This is the priority bill moving through the legislature right now. It does a few things. I think its goal, as stated, is to increase reliability for regular Texans while also adjusting the Texas grid to all the large loads that are coming, so data centers, crypto miners, electrifying oil and gas, and all that. It has a few parts, but I wonder if we could talk about what you think it gets right and what could potentially mess with things in a way that could actually hurt reliability or slow this economic growth that everybody is clamoring for, that the top leaders in this state have said over and over again, Texas is open for business. What are the challenges here, and then what does it get right?
Well, obviously, one of the big challenges, which you brought up in the beginning, is the fact that we have these large loads that want to locate here for a lot of reasons. Texas is a great place to locate and have your business. That being said, the additional wattage needed on the grid has its own issues, and clearly we're in the middle of tinkering around with the grid. We have been the last 3 sessions ever since Winter Storm Uri. So large loads were the reason this bill was created, and the majority of the bill deals with how do they connect in. Is there a fee to connect in, a study, the time period in which the application gets looked at, and there is a deadline in there for that. And all of that is additional regulation that doesn't exist now. Whether or not that's helpful to businesses that are locating here or disincentive is up for argument, I believe. But for grid planning, clearly we need to know who's coming, how much they're going to use, where they're going to connect. From our perspective on the consumer side, there are some issues in the bill we'd like to see clarified or addressed. One is the way that some calculations are made for pricing. It's called 4CP is the short term for it. Right now, it appears that maybe that's getting gamed. It's 4 peak usage time periods that are used for determining that pricing. And some companies, and this came out in the testimony, possibly might be pulling off and not using those days and manipulating the price. That means that some of that cost shifts to consumers and the residential folks, which we are worried about. So part of the bill says, PUC, look at this, figure it out if it is working, and if it's not, come up with something that will work. The other section of the bill we're concerned about, which some of the companies brought up as well, is the part of the bill that allows for ERCOT to shut down a particular company operating, especially if we're in a situation where we need that generation it would normally use elsewhere in the grid. And of course, this is directly out of the fear from Winter Storm Uri. People are afraid of being cut off again, and looked around and saw big companies still operating and lights on at the Capitol and places that were drawing electricity, and residents needed it, and we needed it in hospitals and other places. There's been a lot of discussion on how does that get implemented. Is there a time period in which it gets implemented? And also, from our perspective too, those should be prioritized. Those big companies should be prioritized first to be cut off. Residents should be last. All the rest of us, the hospitals, the places that need it the most should be last. And that is something that probably needs to be clarified in the bill as well. But it is literally a cutoff switch, and that is scaring a lot of people, and for right reasons. The rules on that need to be worked out.
Winston Churchill used to say that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. And that's the way I think of the Texas grid. The Texas grid is the worst kind of grid, except for all the others. They all have problems. And so if you look at the eastern half of the United States, very susceptible to freezes, massive power outages, can't get things built, takes 18 years to build a transmission line. They'll do 5 years of studies and say go back and do the study again. And in the West, they have wildfires, having trouble getting things built, all sorts of negative pricing during the day. So we got an ugly grid, but somehow it's better than every other grid in the United States. And if you compare around the world, I would say it's about as good as it gets. In fact, we host delegations from Germany, China, you name it. They come to Texas and say, well, how did you do that? That's pretty interesting. You're moving so quickly, you're building so quickly. So our strength is we can move quickly at scale. That's a Texas unique advantage, as long as the legislature doesn't make it illegal to move quickly in at scale. We'll see how it goes. Legislature really does throw up roadblocks, and then sometimes at the last minute pull the roadblocks away. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks, but as long as we can build stuff, we'll build transmission and batteries and wind and solar and storage, and we'll get to nuclear and geothermal and everything else. And so I think that's the key thing, is we can build the devices that we need, and that is a real strength. And really only China is moving faster, I would say. Like, there's no country in the world I can think of moving faster than us. Certainly no state in the United States that's moving faster. So we're doing okay. Canada does a few things. They just announced something with nuclear today, actually, which is kind of interesting. So we're actually the shining star, despite the problems of scarcity and rolling blackouts and there's a heat wave and Winter Storm Uri, which was deadly and highly destructive and expensive. So we have our problems, but we're still better than the other people, which is kind of fascinating. And the trick has been to move quickly. So when we passed CREZ was in 2007. It's like ancient history now for the grid. But CREZ was Competitive Renewable Energy Zones. This was a bipartisan law that Democrats and Republicans worked together on to build transmission lines from renewable-rich zones where there's a lot of wind and solar, mostly in West Texas, to load centers like Houston, or these new loads as data centers, although we didn't call them data centers back then. And we said we got to do it, and let's put billions into it, and we'll let the companies invest and get paid back. And we built very quickly. Well, we kind of set world records in some respects for at least modern construction transmission lines. And that kind of urgency was really important, and there was bipartisan support. So if we could have urgent bipartisan support, we can do almost anything. If we don't have urgency or we don't have bipartisan support, it's a little harder to get things done. And so I think that's some of the missing ingredient for us right now. But hopefully we can keep building things. The new loads are interesting because they create all sorts of strain. They might raise the cost for sort of retirees at home. Their cost might go up to help enrich the profits of Microsoft. Well, that doesn't feel very good. But Microsoft doesn't demand that. Microsoft says, we're rich, we can pay. And so the data center people say, we have a lot of money. They're sitting on like $100 billion of cash each company, right? There's a lot of money. And for them, an AI data center, the energy is like 5 to 10% of their total cost. They're paying money for chips and the concrete and the people and all these other things. And so they can pay more for nuclear or geothermal or behind the meter systems. And they're saying, we can pay more. If you'll let us move to the front of the line by paying more, we'll pay more. So they're actually, I don't think the data center companies are trying to drive down the cost. They're trying to accelerate the dial. And I think we should use that and say, we'll pay more. And I think they will. And then that can help lower the cost for other people rather than increase the cost. So we have to sort this all out. But there is some good news in the Texas grid. So I like to wear my Texas Patriot hat every once in a while on that.
Do you think SB 6 could make some of those companies like Microsoft nervous to come to Texas?
They are, yeah. So I talked to data center companies, I talked to the big providers. They're all nervous. They're actually not philosophically opposed. They're like telling us to dial back 5 to 50 hours a year, which is like the hottest hours of the hottest days of August when everyone's air conditioners are on. Telling us that if we dial back 5 to 50 hours a year and then we can get connected sooner, no problem. Giving you, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, a control over my data center, that's a problem. So I think because then Dan Patrick has said very clearly he's suspicious of Bitcoin mining and data centers and AI. Senator Elizabeth Warren says the same thing. So you have far left and far right both saying we're a little suspicious of AI and data centers and cryptocurrency mining, I think, because we're not sure what value it offers to the world and we're not sure who's benefiting. And so there's some political shared concern across the aisle that these economies are not well understood. And so if you have someone who just doesn't like your industry, they might hit the off switch more often than you want. So I think that there's some openness, like, yeah, be flexible, no problem, especially if it means we get hooked up in 18 months instead of 18 years. But I don't want you to control my business because you decide you don't like me one day. And we're kind of in a vindictive political era right now where that kind of thing is easy to imagine.
Right. Clearly, the off switch or the kill switch is something making them nervous. Another part of it as well, which is it's a disclosure issue, but it's for our planning purposes, and I think there's some debate on how to approach it, is the companies are being asked to turn over data about where else they're considering to locate outside of the state of Texas as a mechanism for us to gauge if they're really going to come here or not. And that's a very competitive piece of information if your company is looking at Oklahoma or Louisiana or somewhere else.
It's like asking oil and gas companies, where else are you drilling? They're, we don't
Right,
want to tell you.
Exactly. So there are some privacy issues for the companies that are built into this bill, making them nervous.
I wonder if we could talk about nuclear. Everyone's so hot about nuclear right now. What is the potential there, and what would that path look like in terms of having it be a larger part of our generation mix?
Sure, yeah. So there's a couple of different facets to it. And I think what you're seeing right now, like what I mentioned before, on the advanced nuclear and specifically some of the small modular reactors. So what do we mean by that? Essentially the technology has existed for 70 so years with nuclear submarines, where these are nuclear reactors that are, it can be manufactured in one facility and then moved to another, instead of what you're thinking of most people, like with The Simpsons or something, where it's just, just monstrous facility that generates, a huge amount of power. Well, what purpose does an SMR have? And it has, specifically, industrial applications. So you have, big petrochemical manufacturers on the Gulf Coast here that are looking at, they have generation on site, primarily natural gas. They're looking at replacing that, and they want to do something that's going to last the next 50 years. Not really sure if they want to replace it with another gas turbine right now. And they have the money and wherewithal to, help the development of small modular reactors to be that solution for that facility. And that's what we're going to see over the next, probably, hopefully by the end of the decade here. And then probably others to follow suit. So that was already in the works, for the last few years when the Gen AI and data center discussion started to ramp up. And so now those types of consumers are approaching these other companies for that type of technology on top of conventional nuclear reactors as well, either entering into purchase agreements with existing facilities, or trying to do some very big things like reopening 3 Mile Island. We also have, there's 4 reactors in Texas at 2 different power plants. I've come to learn that they were actually licensed for higher capacities than what they are operating at and what they built. So there's a pathway to see how you could add on to existing facilities and take off a little bit of the timeline required for regulatory approval, which has been a major drag on nuclear build out in this country for 30 years or so. So you see the small modular reactor piece having some interesting kind of niche applications to help solve a bigger problem, and then potentially the conventional piece to be more on a base load grid scale further down the line. My fear is that, this is the technology of 5 years from now, and it always will be kind of thing. It starts, now on having the the economic signals and the political and policy imperatives and priorities to make it happen. Because in 5 years, it's the same thing about the proverb, best day to plant a tree was 20 years ago or today. That's what we're dealing with nuclear going forward.
I think it's a great analogy. I really like nuclear for a reason. I like the large-scale fission. I like advanced nuclear, like SMR, small modular reactors, or MSRs, molten salt reactors, or microreactors. I think there's room for nuclear in the grid. Nuclear is about 20% of electricity generation in the United States today, and it would be good for us to keep it. We probably have room to grow it. And if you get too heavy on nuclear, you get some other risks. Like France has some exposure. They get a lot of nuclear in France. About 75% of their electricity comes from nuclear. And then if your rivers get too hot or low because of a heat wave or drought, you can't get the cooling you need. You have to dial back on nuclear. So there are some reliability risks, but generally speaking, nuclear is really reliable. It's a pain in the neck to build, but once you have it, you're glad you have it. That's generally the way it goes in nuclear. And to get nuclear built, you generally need two ingredients. One is growing demand for electricity and government support. Government support can be financial, doesn't have to be financial, but can be subsidies or indemnity protection, or there's different things you can do, or it can be just policies that are favorable. So we are now in an era where we're talking about nuclear again because demand is growing and the government's interested. The Trump administration's interested, Biden was, Trump was, Obama was. We've actually had bipartisan support at the federal level for quite some time. And now at the state level, you're seeing some bipartisan support. So if you have state groups, environmental groups, industry groups, federal government, everyone's starting to say nuclear is kind of interesting. That looks pretty good for nuclear. It will be great for 2035 and beyond. I doubt it'll be great for 2028, right? So it's kind of one of those, like, if we start now, we can get it built maybe in 5 to 10 years, but not 1 to 5 years. And so the most important nuclear opportunity is kind of what you said, keeping power plants we already have alive, like extending their license for another 20 years or so, even bringing some shuttered ones back open, like 3 Mile Island. Last June, so almost a year ago, 11 months ago, I did a thing with a couple hundred people, almost like a quiz show where we were doing some energy conversation, and we did a Q&A. Which of the following 3 nuclear options would be first to come to market? Large-scale fission, large fusion, or small modular reactor fission? And the answer is none of the above. It's going to be old fission. 3 Mile Island will be open. It didn't even occur to us in June, and this is with people who follow the markets closely, that opening 3 Mile Island would actually be the fastest to market opportunity for nuclear. So a little more of that, a little more extension, then let's build the small modular reactors as quickly as we can. I think the existing nuclear sites are a great place for plus-ups, too. You could add a small modular reactor there. You don't always have to add a large reactor, and that would be great. We already have a nuclear workforce there. We already know how to handle the materials and have the security. And from a Texas perspective, adding more nuclear would help us lower our exposure to fuel costs. It would also give us just a lot more capacity we could use to meet the loads of data centers or factories or oil and gas, whoever wants it. And it would avoid a lot of air pollution. So it would be really good to avoid the emissions of nuclear. That's really handy. We got to figure out waste at some point. In the United States, we've been kicking that can down the road since the 70s. It's time for us to think about reprocessing the waste or just managing it in a more mature way, the way France and Japan do. And so we know how to do it. We just have to choose to do it. So that problem still remains, but that's a very solvable problem.
I was just going to add that from my legislative perspective of it, nuclear's biggest problem at the legislature and getting something passed is a PR issue. Clearly, there are some downsides. It has more upsides, but right now, when you say things like 3 Mile Island,
it's scary for people.
It's scary for people still, and it's scary for some legislators, and so it's hard for people to get their head wrapped around it sometimes. And we talk about it in these venues, but when you take it on a larger scale, we still have political animals at the legislature who have to explain this to voters, and explaining it is where we run into the problem.
So nuclear's a bunch of years away, takes a few years to build a natural gas plant, but we've seen wind and solar and batteries just explode in Texas. These things are here, these resources are here and have played a huge role, like we said in the beginning, in helping the grid. Yet we've also seen over the past few sessions, and I don't know that it's that new necessarily, but a somewhat hostility toward these resources among lawmakers for various reasons. They say they want to protect, our parks and agricultural land and all that. But I'm curious if we could talk a little bit about what lawmakers could do that might hinder those resources, even as they are supportive of nuclear, generally speaking, and want to build more natural gas. I don't know.
Well, well, I'll just lead it off and then you jump in. Winter Storm Uri gave some companies license under the guise of reliability to start attacking competitors in the market. I mean, that's just the most simple way to say what's happened in the last 3 sessions in terms of the direction that legislation has taken towards wind and solar and that type of generation. Texas needs all the generation types. We need them all. That's why we're having this discussion about nuclear. That's why we're talking about giving grants for that. We have a grant program for gas plants. But the growth has been in the area of renewables because it's cheaper, easier to build, can be on the grid quickly, and now you have this advent of batteries coming along where you can generate practically free energy during the day when the sun is shining in West Texas and put it on a battery and then load it on later when the demand is higher and everybody makes it home and turns on their air conditioner. So that has angered, obviously some other entities that come in and decide that they'd like to see some costs directed towards those types of generations. That would be, the requirement in SB 388, which is out there, the 50% dispatchable and how you define dispatchable and what's dispatchable. And we're not going to call batteries dispatchable, even though you can flip a switch and turn them on, sorts of issues. Unfortunately, from the consumer perspective, when that happens, and if it actually came to fruition, the costs for the bills go up because right now that's the cheapest energy that's being sold in the market, the daytime energy that's coming from renewables. And we hate to see it happen. We're spending a lot of time at the legislature talking about how do we limit wind power, how do we limit solar power, what do we do with these batteries? And so, for lack of a better term, we're spending a lot of energy, of our own personal energy and time at the legislature when we could be spending time on some of these bigger, broader issues that really are going to, in the long term, affect the grid.
I think the legislature likes to dabble with outlawing renewables periodically. So it dabbled with that in 21 and 23, now 25. Outline it by requiring that you have to be so far back from the fence line that only the King Ranch can actually build anything, or you have to build a gas plant next to your wind turbine, which is kind of weird because you can't even buy a gas turbine now because of the 6-year backlog and all this kind of stuff. So there are a lot of rules that might just kill the industry as a whole that the industry's pretty freaked out about. But if you talk to the renewable energy developers, they say, we actually don't need anything from Texas. We don't need a subsidy, we don't need a handout, we don't need incentives. We just need to be not outlawed. We need the freedom to build. And so at the last session, 2023, there are a variety of supports for natural gas. The Texas Energy Fund we mentioned earlier that does not include renewables or batteries, and the sort of the tax abatements, property tax cuts. So there are tax cuts that gas gets that renewables were specifically and explicitly excluded from. And renewable industries didn't fight either of those. Like, whatever, you want to subsidize gas, that's fine. You can subsidize them all you want. We don't need a subsidy. We're fine if you subsidize them. Just don't outlaw us. And that argument was effective in 23. We'll see how it happens in 25 because wind, solar, and batteries are so cheap and easy to build. They're so quick. The permits are so easy because they don't have pollution. They have land use. You got to get permission from the landowner. And that's it. So they'll win in the markets anyway as long as they're not outlawed, as a sense. And then if you look at the scale of capital, it's easier to get a $100 million loan or investor for your wind farm than a $10 billion loan or investor for nuclear. So just like the scale of capital just takes a little longer, is a little bit different. And so they serve different purposes and different needs. And then when you get to maintenance season, you can do maintenance on your solar farm, one panel or one row at a time. You don't have to turn off the whole solar farm. You can do maintenance on wind turbines at a wind farm, one turbine at a time. You don't have to turn off the whole wind farm. But for a large coal plant, large gas plant, you turn off the whole plant to do maintenance. And we're in maintenance season right now in Texas, where we have, depending on the day, 15 to 30 gigawatts. That's like 15 to 30 nuclear power plants worth of power of coal and gas offline for maintenance. You don't have that happen with wind and solar. So you have variability with wind and solar based on the weather or meteorological conditions or astronomical conditions like the position of the Earth relative to the sun, but you don't have long maintenance windows. And so the variability of gas and coal shows up where you're offline for a couple of weeks a year. That is a form of variability. It's different. It's one you can schedule, but you take the whole thing offline at the same time. So there are a variety of reasons why renewables and batteries will win in the markets as long as they're allowed to be in the markets. And so that's the biggest risk from the legislature, is just saying you cannot participate in the markets. I think the bills will fail for that reason, but who knows?
As we see how the legislature decides on these questions, I wonder if we could go down the line, and I want to ask you all, how should Texans be feeling about the grid meeting this moment, this demand growth that we've spoken about? And of course, with things being uncertain out of the legislature, but generally, like, how should people be feeling about the grid? Should people feel like, okay, I don't have to think about this and it'll be fine? Or should people be a little worried?
I'm having visions of this tape being replayed when there's a power outage in August. But, I think, over this next summer, there's every reason to be confident that, the grid as it's set up now, the type of growth and load that we're expecting, going to be fine. Improvements in winter, resiliency as well for, later into the year and going into next. I also think that a lot of these load forecasts are a little overly ambitious, when it comes to, particularly with data centers. We don't have a great forecast out there on particularly when it comes to things like computing efficiency and how that can improve and probably bend down these, parabolic demand forecasts that a lot of different entities are putting out there. I think that stuff starts to rationalize over the next year or two, and makes this, load growth more attainable as far as how generation can meet it. So I feel confident that maybe just an optimistic person as well, things that Michael said earlier, this is the state where things get done a lot easier and a lot faster, and we can, answer the bell a lot better than other parts of the country and other parts of the world too. So I feel confident about this going forward.
And I agree. I feel confident as well. I think there's a disconnect between what the public feels about it and what's really happening in terms of reform and what's coming out of the legislature. And I just have to give a shout out to the folks at the PUC who have taken on an amount of work that's, for an agency that size, that really has been monumental over the last 4+ years. The legislation that's coming in and the amount of cases that they're having to handle is huge, and they're really doing a great job there. But we still have, as a community, as Texas as a whole really, but those that live in ERCOT, those feelings left from 2021. And despite all the positive movement and the fact that things are working out and getting better in many areas, I think it's going to be a long time before that still goes away.
And Winter Storm Uri, it was deadly and scary and expensive, and so it's reasonable for us to be worried about that. And I think people who went through the 2003 Northeast blackout have similar concerns. And so the fear I have in Texas is that the next major blackout, which will come someday, hopefully it's decades from now, will happen during a heat wave, and then it could be even more deadly. The French heat wave in 2003 killed 30,000 people. So you can have much deadlier weather events if you don't have the power in the air conditioning to protect people. So it's worth being worried. I also think we're fine this year. I think the PUC did a lot with weatherization and winterization, so the power sector is prepared this year. We built a lot of things. The bigger concern is 5 years from now, because the demand for electricity might grow a lot the next 5 years. We might or might not make it easy to build the things we need for the next 5 years. And so I'm more worried about 5 years from now than today, because I think the PUC's already done what it needed to for today. And therefore the power sector has done what it needs. So I'm actually feeling pretty good this year. We'll see how it goes in a few years. But the thing about Texas is the ability to build things, as Garrett said, and then also just our ability to think about new tools, innovation, this like demand flexibility, turning off hot tubs or pool pumps or hot water heaters. A lot of things we can turn off that we don't need right that moment. That kind of flexibility, in addition to all the other things, will be a real benefit to everyone. And so I'm actually a technical optimist. I think costs will go down and reliability will go up in the next 5 to 10 years. And we'll see how it goes. And I guess this is recorded, so we'll know, as you said, we'll come back and we'll see. And when prices go up and the grid's less reliable, they'll know who to blame.
Thank you so much. I think let's open it up to questions.
And so for those who are watching the program, and if you haven't submitted a question yet, you can do so at texastribune.org/ask. And for those here in person, there's our QR code. But we have plenty of questions here. Kayla, I'm going to look to you to where if I stepped out and you asked a question, and it's been covered, and here I am asking it, you can say, that's great, Matt, but we've discussed it. Colin asks, how would you advise a large public organization seeking to minimize their impact from grid interruptions? Can you address both organizations with distributed facilities, like a school district, city, county, versus a campus setting, or like an airport or university?
Generally speaking, the way to improve reliability is to have on-site sources of energy in case the ones that are sold to you get cut off. And so that might be the grid goes down, do you have some on-site way to generate electricity or some on-site gas or something like that? And so taking HEB, a grocery store, if the power goes out and they have to throw away the food, it's like $250,000 of food per store per outage. And so they've gone to more solar, more batteries, and gas generators on site. And you don't want to run the gas generators year round because it gets too dirty, it gets too expensive, but for those few hours per day, 1 day every other year, it's totally worth it. So behind the meter solutions, on-site solutions, that's what hospitals and grocery stores do. Data centers will do something similar. And so you want to have that, but that tends to be a lot more expensive. It tends to be a lot noisier and a lot dirtier. So you only want to do it for emergencies if it's a gas generator. If it's solar and batteries, that will really help for a few hours here and there, which might be enough for a lot of the types of problems we have. But if you have a 5-day outage, it's harder for a solar or battery system to keep up.
I'll just add one of the little talked about parts of the TEF fund that was set up was supposed to help fund those types of systems, and it still hasn't been implemented, but hopefully in the future there would be funding out there for that.
And that's for the non-ERCOT part of Texas, is that right? That resilience funding, or is that for all of Texas?
There's some for both parts of Texas, but yes, there's funding there.
A guy from Dallas asks, can someone talk about replacing generation capacity that is past or reaching retirement age while still building to meeting increasing demand?
I always have a comment. As I'm a professor, so I always have something to say, whether it's right or not. But I say the grid is doubling. We talked about that. But what we didn't mention, the question points out, is in addition to doubling, we have 50 to 60-year-old stuff that needs to turn off. So we need to replace the stuff that's turning off in addition to growing. And so it's doubly compounded, so to speak. And I'm particularly thinking in Texas as coal plants. We had a wave of coal plant construction in the 70s and 80s. These are kind of old and kind of clunky, and the people who own them are kind of ready to shut them down. And so we're hearing things like from the Trump administration say, you know, beautiful coal, we're gonna keep coal online longer. The people who own coal are kind of like, we don't even want to run that longer. Like from their view, they're 1970s Chevettes, and they want a new BMW. And the new BMW is a natural gas combined cycle power plant, and the Chevette is a 1970s coal plant. So I think a lot of the owners, just like they're finicky, they're hard to work, they're dirty, our neighbors don't like them, we don't like them, they don't even make much money, so they want to shut them down. And that's something we have to do, is replace that capacity as well. And there's some movement to replace like for like. If it's a big thermal power plant that's dispatchable, replacing that with another thermal power plant, which usually be geothermal or biomass or gas or nuclear, is something that's cleaner and newer. So there is an opportunity for that for sure.
Catherine from Dallas mentions, the energy company has raised their rates, yet I was out of a home for more than a year for a grid that wasn't adequately up to date. What protections consumers have against arbitrary price increases?
Well, the price increases, if she's in Dallas area and referring to the local server, the Encore type area, those companies, the TDUs, still go through a rate-making process. They are still rate regulated at the PUC. The full rate cases are every 4 years or so. That being said, one of the things the legislature passed in '23 was the ability for them to come in with interim rate increases, which is now happening more frequently, which is twice a year. And so people are feeling the increases much more frequently. And as I brought up earlier, 50% of the bill for many areas is just that. It's the basic fees for maintaining the transmission and distribution, and it gets charged on their bill. Unfortunately, that's usually set, and the rates are set by the PUC. So you don't have a choice. Even if you're not drawing energy or using the energy, you're still going to pay that part of the bill. And that's really the part of the bill that is concerning us most going into the future, because many things are getting ready to come through and be approved at the PUC that are going to increase that part of the bill. The resiliency plans that were mandated and now being implemented slowly will add billions of dollars to the bill. We also have the new transmission that's been approved, and that's going to be 20 billion. Is that what we're thinking on that? And so all these layers of cost, which it's all going to happen over the next 5 years. We talk about the next 5, 10 years of all this great potential and growth and things that could be built. All of that has to be paid for at some point. And right now, we don't have a way to gather all that and say, this is what it's going to be. Right now, we just have piecemealed proposals and things happening. The CenterPoint resiliency plan is $5.7 billion, and they said when they filed the plan that it would add over $7 a month to the bills for the people that live in that territory. Right now, the people that live in that territory don't know that, but they'll see it, when it gets approved in the next year. And so we have a big concern on how to control it too. That's something maybe legislatively can be taken care of in the next session, because people will start realizing that more than 50% of their bill is going to be just the maintenance of the equipment and the grid.
So I want to get to just a couple questions here, so we'll go over by just a couple minutes. Jay Roberts asks, what are the greatest obstacles to building municipal and other local grid solutions in Texas? Technical, regulatory, et cetera.
Okay, that's a great question. I live in Austin, and we have a municipal utility, Austin Energy. CPS is a sponsor. That is a combined municipal utility for gas and electricity. LA Department of Water and Power. There are a few of these municipal utilities that are small or large around the nation. And there's a raging debate about whether the competitive markets or municipal markets are better. I tend to be a fan of the municipal model for a variety of reasons. One is it can make long-term investments that align with what the local citizenry wants, rather than purely market signals, which might or might not be aligned with what local people want. And so municipalities can use municipal utilities to achieve some philosophical goal, to make your grid more reliable or more affordable or cleaner or something like that, or have it hire local people. So a lot of things you could do with a municipal utility you can't do other ways, but that's really hard to do in Texas starting today. In fact, there's often movements to try to demunicipalize, if that's even a word, the existing utilities. In Texas, when we say local control, that means state control, by the way. So I try to explain this to out-of-state. People are like, Texans talk about local control. That does not mean local control. That means legislative control. And local has got a very different meaning here. So I think it's mostly a political problem. It can be done economically, it can be done technically, but you see really municipalities getting privatized rather than the other way around for the most part. There are exceptions here and there, but it's hard to re-municipalize a local service area.
And our last question here, David asks, how do we address the not in my backyard attitude that seems to be prevalent everywhere these days with regards to building the new infrastructure required to strengthen the Texas grid?
You should take that one. We've been talking too much. Yeah.
Oh, man, what's interesting about that, from a top-down level is there's been all this discussion in Washington on permitting reform for the last several years and doing things at the federal level that, can cut red tape or, simplify regulations on National Environmental Policy Act or any of these others that go towards major infrastructure projects. None of that touches what has been a major problem for a lot of power developers across the country, and that's county and local opposition that has brought a halt to solar farm, to wind farms, to for decades for transmission projects. You may even see this with battery storage, particularly because of an accident that happened in California a few months ago with a battery facility there. And I think it all starts with, a very concerted effort on stakeholder engagement among these developers and, even to a certain extent, the regulators and policymakers that are involved in this. If people can all attempt to get on the same page on what, benefits some of these projects, and then have an honest conversation of what the concerns are with locals that are impacted by this, then there's a path forward for this as well. A certain extent, other answer to this is what we saw in Canada with the Trans Mountain Express pipeline, which took Canadian oil sands towards the West Coast. And this was a years-long struggle to get this pipeline built until the cost for it doubled because of the amount of money that had to go into the local communities that were this project was transversing, basically, essentially to pay them off, to make them whole for the land that would be disrupted for this. So when it comes to the NIMBYism piece of this for all kinds of energy infrastructure, it starts with the engagement piece, and essentially it's going to cost developers more at the end of the day, unfortunately, in some cases. But there also has to be this realization among the broader population that this is a major challenge for us to get more power constructed to keep this economic engine going, especially here where this is the most economically diverse and dynamic state in the country, in my view. And it all starts and stops with power. There's a great quote, I can't remember the CEO, energy is roughly 5% of the economy, but it's the first 5%. It all, begins and ends on being able to meet the call of higher electricity production.
Yeah, I think that casts us forward. Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you so much.
All right. And with that, we thank our panel. We thank Kayla for moderating. Thank you all for gathering here and online. Appreciate it.